Hey guys, welcome to the test corrections video, and I am going to start with number 1 because I'm adding together two numbers that have a different sign. I need to actually find their difference because this negative is going to cancel out a lot of that positive, but there's going to be some left over. So I'm going to find the difference between the two. So 15.2 take away 8.5. And you remember from grade school, I've got to borrow from this 5, make that a 4, to turn that into a 12. 12 minus 5 is 7, and then 14 minus 8 is 6. I line out my decimal, just bring it straight down from the problem right there. And it's going to be a positive 6.7 because I have more positives than I do negatives. So the answer is positive 6.7. For number 2, in order to be able to add these fractions together, I need to get a common denominator. And the least common denominator for 4 and 12 would be a 12. So I'm going to move this over here to the side. Because I've got a 5 over 12 already, I'm just going to move it over there because it's already got a 12 in the denominator. But I got to do something with this 3/4. So in order to get that 4 to be a 12, I had to multiply it by 3. Which means I needed to multiply the numerator also by 3. So that 3 over 4 is now going to become a 9 over 12. If I add 9 over 12 plus 5 over 12, that gives me 14 over 12. And if I simplify, divide them both by 2, that leaves me with 7 over 6. So my final answer is 7 over 6. In number 3, in order to be able to subtract these fractions, they need to have a common denominator. The least common denominator for 7 and 3 is going to be 21. So 7 times 3 is 21, so that means I need to do 2 times 3, which gives me 6 over 21. Then I need to convert that 1 over 3, and in order to do that, let me actually scoot this over here a little bit. Okay, in order to turn that 3 into a 21, I had to multiply it by 7, which means I needed to multiply the top by 7. So that becomes 7 over 21. So now I've got 6 over 21 minus 7 over 21. So if I only have 6 over 21, but then I actually subtract or take away 7 over 21, I'm going to end up in the negatives, which means I'm going to end up with a negative 1 over 21 for my final answer. For number 4, I've got a negative 3.11 take away another 12.4. So a good way to think about it is that I'm already in the hole $3.11, for example, and then I go down, that means I take away another 12.4. So I'm really just going to get more negative. So these are two negative numbers that I'm going to add together. So I'm going to line up the decimals, negative 3 over 11, negative 12.4. I'm going to put a 0 right there to use as a placeholder so that my decimals can stay nice and lined up. 1 plus 0 is 1. 1 plus 4 is 5. 3 plus 2 is 5. And then I don't have anything to add that 1 to. So because these are both negatives and I'm putting them together, it's exactly like putting together two debts. My final answer is also going to be a negative because I started out more negative and then I went down even more for a total of negative 15.51. To divide fractions, remember that you take the first fraction, change the division into multiplication, and then take the reciprocal of the second one. In other words, flip it over. I've got a little bit of canceling that I can do first because 3 goes into 3 once, and then 3 goes into 12 4 times. 7 goes into 7 once. 7 goes into 21 3 times. So if I multiply straight across, 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 4 is 4. So that's going to leave me with a 3 over 4. For number 6, I'm going to go ahead and just keep on going here. I have a little bit of canceling again that I can do first in order to make this a little bit easier. Because I can do 5 divided by 5 to get 1. I can get 15 divided by 5 to get 3. Then I can do 4 divided by 1 4 divided by 4, to get 1, and 8 divided by 4 to get 2. So now I've got much smaller numbers to multiply, because remember we just multiply straight across. So 2 times 3 is 6, 1 times 1 is 1. You could leave it as 6 over 1, or you could simplify it to a 6. Number 7, we've got 3.5. I'm going to do it 2 different ways. I'm going to do it the long division way first. So I'm going to do 3.5 divided by 1.4. And 1.4 goes, remember that you can't actually divide by a decimal number. So let me rewrite this to make this a little bit neater here. 3.5. There we go. Divided by 1.4. So I'm going to move my decimal point over one place to make it a whole number, which means I need to move this one over one place to make it a whole number. 14 goes into 35 twice. 2 times 14 is 28. That is going to leave me, if I do 35 minus 28, that leaves me with a 7. And I'm not done yet. We can't leave remainders when we've got decimals. So I'm going to add a 0 and then bring it down. 14 goes into 70 5 times. So now I don't have a remainder left over. And remember that when you're figuring out where the decimal goes, that you look in the division problem and you just shoot it straight up. So it's going to be 2.5. A shortcut is that you can actually just move the decimal over one place in the top here to turn this into a 35. And then you can move the decimal over 1 point here. If you move it over in the top, you move it over by the same number in the bottom. That'll be 35 over 14. Then if you divide both of them by 7 to simplify, that leaves you with 5 over 2, which coincidentally is the same thing as 2.5. So either way, whether you did it the long division way or just a little shortcut where you scooted over the decimal the same number of places, you end up with 2.5 or 5 over 2. You just make sure that you do whichever way works out and makes the most sense to you. Okay, here at number 8, remember that you start off by multiplying decimals as if there were no decimals there. You don't need to worry about lining up the decimals or anything like that, even though in this case they kind of do end up lined up. And I'm going to take the 5 times 8 and get 40 and carry my 4. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 4 is 9. And I could take that 0 and multiply it by the top, but there's really no need for me to. So right now I've got a 90. And I need to look at the original problem. So see how I've got one number behind the decimal here, one number behind the decimal here. That means I need a total of 2 numbers behind the decimal in my answer, which means I need 0.90 or 0.9 for my answer. Okay, for number 9, I'm going to set up a proportion. And of course, this is a percent problem. So part of my proportion is going to be out of 100 because percents are always out of 100. When it says what percent, that means it's my percent that's missing. So the X is going to go across from the 100. And then of is our code word for that's the whole amount. So the 40 is going to go across from a 100, which means that 15 is going to go there in the top. So if I cross multiply, 15 times 100 is 1500. And then 40 times X is 40x. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 40. If I do 1500 divided by 40, I end up with 37.5. So that means it's going to be 37.5%. Again, we've got another percent problem here. So percents are always out of 100. I'm going to put that 25% on top of the 100. Of what number? That means that our mystery number this time is the whole amount, because that keyword of tells me that X goes across from the 100, which means that the 15 has to go there. So if I do 15 times 100, which I need to do if I'm cross multiplying, that gives me 1,500. And then if I do 25 times x, I get 25x. Then if I divide both sides by 25, 1,500 divided by 25 gives me 60. There's also another way that you might have done this that I actually saw several of you guys doing without setting up proportions, which I thought was great. So I'm going to show you that way too. So if 15 is 25% of what number? So 25% means the same thing as the fraction. It's equivalent to 1/4. So if 15 is 1/4 of what number? That means if you just take 15 4 times, that'll give you the whole amount as well. So either way, you could get 60 to be the answer to number 10. For number 11, so we've got another percent problem. So you answered 85% of a 60 question multiple test. So that tells you that 60 is your total because it comes after the word of. So I'm going to put 85% over 100. That's 60 goes across from the 100 because that is your whole amount times x. If I cross multiply, so if I do my 60 times 85, that is going to give me 5,100. And then 100 times x is going to give me 100x. If I divide both sides by 100, that's going to give me 51 is equal to x. For number 12, in order to find the perimeter, we need to find all 4 of the sides here. This is a rectangle, so I'm able to figure out very easily that that the bottom and the right-hand side are 9 and 4. So then we simply add them together. So 9 plus 9 plus 4 plus 4. If we add that together, it gives us 26. And we're talking about perimeter, so that means that our units are going to be just plain old centimeters, not centimeters squared. That is what you do when you get area. And speaking of area, the formula for finding the area of a rectangle is the base times the height. In this case, because the top is 9, I know the bottom is 9. So I'm going to do 9 times 4, which is 36. And because the units are centimeters and this is area, that means it's 36 centimeters squared. For part B here, we're finding the perimeter of a triangle, and we need to add the outsides together. I noticed on the test that some of you guys tried to include this guy right here. Okay, that 6 is just telling you the height of the triangle. It is not part of the outside of the triangle. Okay, so we should have just added to find the perimeter these 3 sides right here. So 20 plus 8 is 36. And it's just going to be plain old inches because we're finding perimeter. Now for the area, now a lot of us did the first part right, which is the base times height, the 20 times 6, which would be 120. But then you forgot that the triangle also has in it 1/2. So you have to take 1/2 of the base times the height. So 1/2 times 120 means you should have gotten 60 inches squared. Number 6, or letter C, the perimeter. The fact that these are all right here means that all of those sides are congruent. So it's just going to be 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, which means it's going to be 24, just regular old meters because we're talking about perimeter. And because a square is a special kind of rectangle, the formula, just like the rectangle we did a moment ago for area of a square, is just base times height. But of course, since it's a square, the base and the height are the same. So it's going to be 6 times 6, which is 36 meters squared. And now for the circle, which was probably the hardest one for us. So remember that the formula for the perimeter of a circle is called circumference. And the formula for that is 2 times pi times the radius. So here's my radius. So it means I'm going to do 2 For pi, we use 3.14, and the radius is 3. So if I do 2 times 3.14 times 3, I get 18.28 centimeters. Or a lot of teachers will allow you to just kind of leave that pi out right now. So just do the 2 times 3, which is going to leave you with a 6 pi centimeters. So either one of those would be okay. Either 6 pi centimeters or 18.28 centimeters, depending on whether or not you actually multiplied the 2 and the radius by the pi. The formula for area is pi times the radius squared. So if you left the pi out, kind of chilling out there to the side, the radius squared would be 3 times 3, which means that your final area would be 9 times pi centimeters squared, because again, we need square units. Or if you multiplied it out and you did the 9 times 3.14, sorry, I decided that was getting a little bit messy, so wanted to do it over again with kind of a blank slate. So we already did the circumference, so we're going to forget about that. So just area, remember the formula is pi times the radius squared. So here's my radius. So it's pi times 3 squared. So some teachers allow you to just do the 3 times 3, which of course is going to be 9, and just leave it as 9 times pi, but you still need your units, which is centimeters squared. Now, if you went all out and you did 9 times 3.14, you should have ended up with 28.26 centimeters squared. So either one of these two answers would be okay. Either you squared the radius and you got 9 times pi centimeters squared, or you multiplied it out and you got 28.26 centimeters squared. Either one of those is okay. You just needed to make sure you started out with the right formula, pi r squared.